computer. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. So today we're going to have a very special conversation. I'm really grateful in many senses for the pandemic because it's allowed us to explore new ways of being in touch and having communication. We've always known that Zoom existed in all these platforms, but we've never, as the Cheeky Natives, decided, hey, maybe we can connect to writers across the world, and we can actually have the same conversations we normally have with these writers, and you can have a part of those conversations with us. So I'm really grateful. And so we're going to have an absolutely fantastic conversation today, and I'm so very excited. Dr. A.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited. I think that Natasha was right. I think that some of the amazing things that have come out from the pandemic has been less of a reliance on face-to-face, but also just an ability to really connect with people and to use technology for that. And I have the special honor today of introducing our guest. I just want to read a little bit of her bio so that you know what kind of greatness you're in company of. Natasha Omokhodion-Kalulu Banda is a UK-born Zambian of Nigerian and Jamaican heritage who lives in Lusaka. She's married and has 3 children. She's been published in the African Women Writers e-publication anthology, Different Shades of a Feminine Mind, and featured on AfricanWriter.com for her story, To Hair is Human, To Forgive is Design. She has been published in Short Story Day Africa, and the manuscript of her novel, No Bia from Here, was selected as a Grey Wolf Africa Prize finalist in 2019. And we have the special honor of discussing this novel, No Bia from Here. Welcome, Natasha. How are you?
Thank you so much, Alma. I'm fantastic. Thank you. I hope you're well. I hope Mr. L is well. It's really nice to be in your company.
Hey. So, Natasha, before we start, may we please ask you to read from your book, just so we give people an entry of, what's happening. You could read from the prologue, and just so that, we enter with you in this world.
Absolutely. So would you like me to read the whole prologue or just some of it?
So you can read from page 3 until, I suppose, the end of the prologue.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm going to read for you the story. This particular story, the character we're looking at now is Margaret Bupe Kombe, who in the rest of the story is referred to as Grandmother Margaret. And it is set in Lusaka, Zambia in 1967. A bass guitar and a piano played the prelude to trumpet notes from Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. The music filled the bedroom. That was Washiside's favorite music. He was Washiside, or the father of CJ to her, but to the world, he was the great, honorable Charles Kombe. Maybe he would like it if he found her playing it for him, dressed beautifully like his starlet. She braided her hair in rough plaits and placed a blonde beehive-shaped wig on her head. She looked at the pills on her table and shook a handful of shiny red capsules into her palm. She swallowed them with another drink. A warm glow spread outwards from her stomach. It was enough to numb the pain. She looked in the mirror and touched herself gingerly. Perhaps that was how Charles touched Fabiola. She clutched her womb as though trying to tear out fistfuls of flesh while returning the blank stare of her image. Margaret glided through the hall with bare feet and stepped carefully down the stairs, the glamorous sapphire blue train of her ball gown trailing behind her. Its cold silk hugged her skin softly. She paused, one hand holding the banister and the other touching her forehead. Sweat beaded on her lip. She passed the indoor courtyard to the red brick veranda and down to the swimming pool. Perhaps a short dip in the water would give her some relief. She plunged her foot into the water. It was cool, inviting. She felt dizzy, happy, and sad all at the same time. How could this be? She laughed at the irony of it all. Perhaps this way the gods would feel she shared their wicked sense of humor. The world swam in Margaret's vision, a blur of blues and greens against the twisted silhouettes of rustling trees. She heard them whisper, laughing, nudging each other with murmurs of scorn and hisses of accusation. She looked up. The world swung. She felt lighter than a leaf tossed on a breeze. For one beautiful moment, just after losing her balance, she seemed to hang in the air above the placid green water like an angel. Her gown flowed gracefully behind her, obedient to the power of the warm night wind. She felt free. Finally, like the earlier days from the mountaintops of Chinsali. Rushing rivers gushing beneath her feet, rich verdant valleys rolling out to the skies before her, to the point where the sky meets the land, a horizon where God can be found. That place where the goddesses rest their pestles against the skyline. With a splash, she fell into the kidney-shaped pool. Her eyes shut tightly as she sank slowly, her dress tangled around her thin legs. Water. It surrounded her. She moved her hands through it, searching for the surface, but she was so weak. She opened her mouth wide for air, kicked her legs, tried to climb. Another deep gasp for air, and her face was smothered in fabric like a smooth oval tarpaulin. The sapphire silk wrapped itself around her, while the water spiraled her downwards, sinking her further into the wet abyss. She had never learned to swim. In London, young CJ and his best friend Abisola clambered downstairs to see who was calling incessantly at such an ungodly hour. Mrs. Ayomide had beaten them to it, and she crept out of the drawing room. She was sweating profusely and her eyes were unsteady. CJ, your father is on the line for you. He took the handset and felt its cold, coiling cable along his skinny arm. He turned away from the look on his friend's mother's face and inclined his head low, to the right, as though it would help him to hear the voice on the other side better. Crackling static, silence. Good morning, sir, he said, greeting his father, still wondering why he would call so early at his friend's home. His eyes were pressed shut as he adjusted to the sunlight seeping in through the glass of the drawing room. CJ, your mother was found dead in the swimming pool this morning. CJ slumped onto the wooden cabinet behind him. His father's deep baritone voice rolled through the phone line from the other side. Distant and cold, like a dart to a board, he minced no words. I'm making arrangements for your flight. Please be ready for your pickup at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And remember to thank the Ayomides for looking after you. Unfortunately, this is one of those times in life where we must stand strong, my son. Your siblings need not be disturbed by this news. Not a word to them until I say so. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Your brother and sister will continue the term, and we will see them during the summer holidays as always. The phone went dead with a click.
Batum, wait again, yo. That's
Every time I hear that passage, right, I'm just like, how could Charles be so cruel? Can you imagine the pain of like not being told that your mother has passed on? Can you imagine just coming home, like you're excited, it's summer holidays, yes, and you come home and they're like, oh yeah, so where's your mom? And you're like, she died 3 months ago, but thanks.
yeah, and I mean, also like entering the story like that, right? So for me, I find that now I was more interested in what is going to happen subsequent to Margaret passing away and whether I would find out more about who this Margaret is, because all I know is this woman who is now no longer there. And I suppose I wanted to start here. Why was it important for you to start the story so evocatively, right? So drawing people in, why was that a decision that you made, particularly in the prologue?
Okay. Well, for starters, Grandmother Margaret's story is the foundation of the entire story. And her death, her particularly unsavory, what would you call it? It's a bit scandalous, isn't it? In those days, they would call it scandalous. It's very tragic as well. But her tragedy is the springboard of everything else, right through generations. This one particular accident continues to reverberate throughout the whole story. So it was important for it to be the beginning. It was important for it to set the tone, introduce you to the why of it all, because the girls that would come to later meet have no idea. They're still trying to figure this out. But for you as the reader, it was important that the reader is sort of like, oh my gosh, I know this, and this affects the girls like this, but they don't know. So the whole point was that it has impact as the girls are really trying to find out what happened to their grandmother, and you as the reader are able to carry this with you. And yes, it basically springboards the rest of the story until we reach the resolution. Yeah.
I want to just talk a little bit about some of the themes that you've covered in the book, right? I think that there's a beautiful thing that you do where you analyze, where you show, I guess, the destructive power of secrets, right? So there is this big shame regarding Margaret's death, the ways in which she died, and all the circumstances leading up to it. But there's also a pervasive theme of secrets that runs throughout the book, right? And I think that when you think of particularly African cultures, we're taught not to question certain things. So you don't ask things, you just know that this is not to be spoken about. And yet secrets are a central theme in this book. Why was that important for you to write about? And what have you since, now that you've written the book, what have you since thought about family secrets, right? Have you started to be more understanding of your own family secrets?
Ooh, I don't know about more understanding yet, but I think, okay. So from two different angles, secrets in African society are a way that elders would shield younger generations from stuff that they didn't really need to know. I mean, they would call it grown folks' business. It's none of your business. You know what I mean? You are here, you're fed, you're well. So what happened 20 years ago has nothing to do with you. So culturally, that's how we're raised. You will not outwardly have adults having to feel like they owe you an explanation as to why X and why things are the way they are. It just is what it is. So we're supposed to move on. So I think using the secrets as a theme was supposed to show the destructive power that they can have when things are unresolved within families. But it also was a device to show the difference in how we value communication within generations, So you could have the older generation who say, children do not need to know about what happened. That's grown folks' business. And the future generation who feel like, no, but it's my right to know. I'm supposed to know. Why haven't you told me? So it was also a device to show the differences, in especially, I think, post-colonial Africa, because we sort of had one way of doing things, and then now you just have another way of doing things. And it's supposed to show that difference and that growth or evolution, I guess, over time.
But I suppose also, Natasha, when you think about secrets, right? Secrets is also like something that permeates in the relationships between mothers and daughters. So you've got Margaret and you've got Bupe's relationship with their mother. And in many ways, right, the undercurrent that, oscillates between these relationships is the secret. So on the one hand, it's like they have really difficult relationships with their mothers, but you get a sense that the difficult relationship with their mothers is one, yes, it may just be a difficult relationship, but it's also the mothers are like, I can't fully give myself to you because if I do, I need to tell you this crucial part of our family gatherings. But I suppose the question then to ask is, why was it important for you to write difficult relationships between daughters and their mothers?
Okay, so like I said, I think the result of writing further difficult relationships, the whole point of it was to show that it stemmed from the original difficult relationship right at the top, which was grandmother and grandfather Kombe. So then, like I said, their difficult relationship, because things were not resolved, because there were so many secrets, because of what happened, that difficulty sort of permeates, through Bupe and her mom and through Maggie and her mother. And that is exactly why by the time we get to Bupe and Maggie, they are like, no, we need to solve this, we need to find a way to figure this out. And that includes their own relationships with their moms, and their dads. In fact, I think, the relationships throughout are pretty fractured.
I suppose to think about, so it seems a large theme of the book is this idea of family, right? And in many ways, the importance of family, but also the fractured nature of these families, right? So you've got the grandmother and grandfather who at the top had their own problems and their own difficulties. But then because of that generational fracture, you then get CJ and CJ's family and the difficulty there. Then you get Maggie and Maggie's mom and their family. And it seems there's always a lot of conflict between at least the parents of these families. But you introduce Maggie and Bupe as sort of an idea of reimagining what family can look like. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, right? This reimagination through a sort of second generation of family members. Because Maggie and Bupe for me feel like my generation, who is like, we're going to talk about this, we're going to discuss, we want to lay everything out on the table. No, we can definitely handle it. Like, you can't hide these things from us. And I wanted you to talk about this idea that they come in as a sort of reimagining of family and communication.
Yeah. Bupe and Maggie, I really love those girls. Bupe and Maggie, unfortunately, are sort of the ones who feel the brunt of it, I guess. I mean, everyone felt the brunt of the original mistakes Grandpa Charles made, but they become the hope for the family. They become the sort of, like what could be, what this could be there. So I wanted them to be ordinary girls who have to go through this extraordinary journey in order to mend their family, and to show that just because you may be of the younger generation doesn't mean you don't have a role in repairing what has been done before.
I'm particularly interested when it comes to Bupe and Maggie's relationships with the men in their lives, right? And as an example of this repairing or this fracturing, right? So you see, it's interesting, right? Because you would think that Bupe, who comes from this ideal nuclear two-parent involved grandmother home, would not be sort of making the kind of romantic decisions that she does. And yes, I was also rolling my eyes a lot at Bupe, because what is this thing with Jerome? But anyway, whereas you think of like Maggie and Terrence, right? Maggie has this amazing partner who in many ways ticks all the boxes, but because of the ways in which Maggie's own parents' relationship has been, she finds herself unable to navigate that relationship. And I thought it was so interesting that you chose those two very different ways to highlight the ways in which generational trauma also then plays into people's romantic relationships, right? It's all of their childhood traumas. Because I read something interesting on Twitter the other day about how people who don't address their childhood traumas will then find them coming out in their romantic relationships. And I honestly felt that Bupe and Maggie were the perfect example of that.
Absolutely. I think we do carry our stuff, if it's not dealt with, into our, our adult relationships. There's so many examples of people projecting, they might find the right partner, but because they haven't resolved issues, things can be difficult. It can be difficult. So yes, it was deliberate to create their relationships in such a way that it reflected that they were still struggling with unresolved issues from the past. With Bupe in particular, the way I think of Bupe, I think she Bupe's superpower is that she's got lots of choices right from the very beginning, right? So she's half Zambian, half Jamaican. She's in Britain. And right from the very beginning, she too struggles with the where am I from question. And the one person who really gets her is Jerome. So for all his faults, he's the one who gets her. And I see Alma rolling her eyes. She's like, Jerome gets her. So for her, it's a really deep-rooted thing. She's like, am I British? Am I Jamaican? Am I Zambian? And he gets her, although not in the way that we'd like him to, but because she finds that connection with him, she sort of hangs on to that because she finds this person who potentially, he's not African like her dad, he's not Jamaican like her mom, but he's just a British guy who, you know what I mean? They connect on that level. But also because Bupe has choices from day one, I believe her choices later on they paralyze her. So when she comes to Africa and she now sees like, wow, okay, there's a whole nother world I'm from. There's a whole nother wider, like bigger perspective. When she goes back, there are two ways she could have used that and empowered herself with it, or she could have paralyzed, just shut down who she did. And she went back to what she knew. She went back to familiar. So for me, it was important to bring that out using her relationship as well, to show sort of the static place she found herself in, until of course the end, where she finds her power within herself.
Jerome is trashy. But also, there's something you touched on, right? About displacement. Okay, so there's a common theme of displacement that runs throughout. There's a physical displacement in that your characters move between the UK and Zambia. Charles is like imprisoned at some point, comes out. There's a physical displacement, but you also get the feeling of there being like a spiritual displacement, and it factors into all of their relationships, right? So this feeling of never quite belonging, never quite being, seems to even filter into their relationships with each other as a family. And I was really interested in the use of displacement in this dual context, right?
Yeah, displacement is a big theme in this book, as you rightfully said, and also in using it, because in displacement, what also happens is you have sort of diasporic cousinships, or even if you want to use it as a metaphor for literally, slaves who were taken away hundreds of years ago. Our cousins in the Caribbean or in the Americas and us and so on. It was supposed to reflect that you grew up in different environments, but you're still forever kin. And also that feeling, that longing of a place sometimes where you've never even been to before, but you still feel a connection to it. And I wanted that to come out on both sides. So the way Bupe had never been to Africa before, but she knew and she felt, and she really wanted her cousin. All she wanted was her sister, her one. In my tradition, we call them sister, your cousin, your sister, and vice versa. You have Maggie here, who she's displaced. Her parents' divorce was not just a sign the paper; it was a geographical divorce as well. So it's about just the melancholy that follows being separated from a land that you're from, your ancestors are from, and what the ripple effects thereafter.
And I suppose also there's this idea of constantly searching, right? And it seems for Bupe, it's searching, perhaps with Jerome, there's something that she's searching for, and hopefully she can find with Jerome, right? And then there is Maggie who, for many of us, Maggie would be someone who we say has a perfect life, right? Maggie grows up, and Maggie...
As an adult?
As an adult, not as a child, as an adult. But Maggie is also constantly holding on to, I need to find this person who left when I was younger. I have no idea why they left. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need to find him. And in finding him in many ways, I think I'm going to find myself. So I wanted you to speak about like the sort of theme of identity, this constantly searching for self, because it seems both Maggie and Bupe are constantly searching for themselves. We don't know if they ever get to find themselves, but they find each other. But I just wanted to know about this theme of constantly searching for self.
I just want to say, before Natasha answers, that what Maggie found was like a reflection. It was like art imitating life, right? Because Abusola is just trash, nothing to write home about, and she really wasn't missing out on anything. And I suppose that had her mother just told her that this person is just trashy, like you're not missing out on anything, perhaps all of this searching and this like, oh, I need my father, would have been relieved, because he really was just like trash, rubbish. But that's just me, and Abusola, he sucks.
Well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, these things we're still tethered, aren't we? Parents, children, ancestors, kids, your grandkids, we're tethered. And I think it's more complex than whether your mom or dad is trashy or really beautiful. I mean, like, they're still your mom or your dad.
No, I mean, okay, to be fair, I guess I should expand a little bit on that. And I guess for me, it was how, because of Stella's just absolute refusal to connect with her child, right? So that emotional distance, and the fact that she held on to all of those secrets, her absolute, just that inability, that chasm that existed, is really what created this romanticization that Maggie had, right? Because Maggie needed to just at least have one parent who would be loving and emotional and kind, and Stella, who was there, was not. So of course, the person who's not there, you can create all of these ideas around, and so I guess, yes, I mean, to expand a little bit more, that's really what I meant. That had Stella just been open and said, okay, so this is what happened, this is why I felt the way that I did about your father, maybe Maggie would not have felt so deeply that there was this big thing missing because of what she'd been deprived from Stella, because Stella was also just so emotionally distant, right? Stella herself had all of this anger and all this resentment, and it really came out in their mother-daughter relationship.
Yes, it did.
But Abusola still trash.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I think about them a bit more from a complex perspective, including Stella. I think Stella was just a product of
shame,
of what happened in their time. It's a shame that only towards the end she starts to unfurl and let herself be a bit, but it's all a result of the tragedy in the prologue.
I'm curious, right? And I don't know if this is maybe... I'm curious about the relationship. So I felt like this was a conversation around forgiveness, right? That was happening in the book, but was happening at different levels in the book. And I think that I'm always interested in forgiveness as a theme, just because of the ways in which I think as Black people on the continent, we've been taught about forgiveness. So forgiveness always seems to look a particular way for us, and particularly for Black women. Forgiveness often means that you don't hold people accountable. You are not allowed to recall events that have happened, right? And to say, yes, I've forgiven you, but you did A, B, C, D to me, is often seen as shunned, right? Like, you're not forgiving this person. Why are you still talking about this? We've moved on as a family. But I felt that forgiveness was a theme that just ran as an undercurrent in this book, right? So you see the children begin to forgive their parents for what they may have felt with their shortcomings. So you see that, like, Bupe, and I mean, Maggie also begins to understand why her mother felt the way that she did, what may have informed some of her mother's behavior as well. But you also see the siblings start to understand why Uncle CJ never actually said about their mother's passing, for example, and there's like a theme of forgiveness that runs through the book, and I'm really interested in that, in like the ways in which people navigate the harm that they've experienced, but also their own parts in the harm that they've caused others.
Yeah. With regards to the book in particular, I think a lot of where the family is reached by the time it's completely, there's no communication. Stella doesn't talk to CJ, and vice versa. Really, the only thing left for them was to resolve it and forgive each other if they were going to move on together as a family. So forgiveness had to happen. The question was just the how. And like you're saying, in our African context, usually it's, okay, let's forgive and forget, sweep this on the rug. But these guys didn't. I mean, for, tens of years, they just, each of them held on to their own pain of the loss of their mom, of their grandmother, and it seeps down further. So the whole thing of forgiveness within the book is just something that was unattainable and is therefore a goal, is the ultimate goal for if you look at the family as a character, that is the one goal that was so elusive. And yes, then therefore that does carry the story until we finally find it. Yeah.
I also wanted to speak about the idea of the grandfather for me sort of was on this road of redemption, particularly with the grandchildren, Margaret and Bupe. There's a line in the book where he says, Maggie or Bupe says, he calls us his two wives, right? Because, and I really like that idea that in many ways it felt that like Charles was really trying to make amends for things that happened a long time ago, right? And in a moment, I was like, but Charles, it don't matter. She did. She did. She did.
Wow.
Wow. I don't know. I have some type of feelings about Charles, because I felt that Charles in many ways was, and I think we should talk about this for a moment, right? We find our place in Zambia at a time where like a lot of African countries around those time were fighting for their independence, and there was a lot of politics involved. So there was a decision between here I'm supposed to choose my family, and here I'm supposed to choose my country. And technically in choosing my country, I'm also choosing my family because I'm fighting for their liberation. But what is the place of politics in our personal relationships? What is the cost of fighting for a liberation movement at the cost of our personal relationship? And I think you deal with that quite beautifully in the book, right? This constant nudging feeling of like, is Charles making the right decision? And if he made a different decision, would the book have started? Would we have encountered these people if Charles had made a different decision?
I think that, what Natasha did with Charles was to make Charles one of the most relatable, one of the most human characters in the book, right? So you have these two, Bupe's parents are just like absolutely in love with each other, and the world just revolves around their love. And Stella is this like freedom fighter who is resolute, she's stoic, she is just there, like she's about it, right? And you often feel like there's no space for humanity in those very big, parallels, right? But Charles is this human being that we admire. He's highly admired in Zambia, right? He's this freedom fighter who's done these amazing things, but he's also human and he's erred a lot. So he's made a lot of mistakes, and he's this person on the road to redemption. And I think that in many ways, Charles is one of the most relatable and one of the most human characters in the book, because who has not done things that they may not necessarily be proud of, and who does not necessarily feel that they're always on their way to redemption, or always on their way to getting better? I feel like that is more relatable than the stoic figure who is just she's about the struggle, and there's no space for anything else.
I don't know. I could say that for Abisola as well. Except almost like no. But let me stick to Grandpa Charles. Grandpa Charles, for me, when I created him, I was trying to paint a picture of the patriarchy that I think, existed in their time. And I'm saying this deliberately because before that patriarchy, we had matriarchy, where I come from. And you sort of ended up with this generation of men who this is this or it's that. But also, as you're saying, so yes, they may have been flawed, but they also really did stand for something. They genuinely, passionately, with all of themselves, when they believed in something, particularly in this is in regard now to the freedom struggle, they were willing to give up everything. And like Elle said, the cost, therefore, in a lot of cases, and I think I heard one of Malcolm X's daughters say it on I can't remember which year it was, but she did say the words, there is a cost to the struggle. And if you go back, I think, to quite a lot of families, like, who are prominent in the civil rights here in Africa, and you will find a kind of fracture or crack that continues because somebody had to pay the price somewhere along the line. So creating Grandpa Charles was, in all of what I made him, meant to reflect that. And I'm glad to hear that you sort of felt it in him. Yeah, but of course he was flawed, and Fabiola came along.
I'm making all these faces because, wow, there was just so much happening there. I'm also really interested in their, so I'm interested in the siblings, but I'm particularly interested in their younger brother, Kabusola. I don't know his name, escapes me. Kabaso is an interesting character in a lot of ways. Kabaso is also estranged from his family, but he's estranged for very different reasons.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about Kabaso and why Kabaso was such an important character for you to write in the book, and I guess what you hoped he'd bring out.
Okay, so when I create this family, I think they're also meant to reflect, I think, different aspects of my society, even though they're just one family. And I can say I've probably met a lot of Kabasos who I feel for daily. And I think creating him was just my own way of reflecting where we are, reflecting how, especially, again, it's a generational thing, right? So you have, grandparents or parents from a certain generation who just didn't understand situations like Kabaso's. He's great, he's fantastic, he's outgoing, but the distance still remains because Grandpa Charles, just from the time that he's from, he just doesn't get it. So I've seen a lot of pain caused by situations like that, and I really, I created Kabaso to reflect that and hope that people stop and reflect.
For me, it was also interesting that, because I think this is not all the time, but most of the time, a thing that happens for queer people. When we get an opportunity for freedom, like, we want to do everything that we couldn't do because of the constricted places that we come from. So Kabaso for me was just like, I wanted more. I honestly wanted more. I was like, give me more. I want to know more, right? Because I felt that when he was in London, it felt there was a certain type of freedom, but this freedom was like, hey, I'm here and I'm here to stay, right? But it felt the here to stay was not a freedom because of London, but was a freedom because I couldn't exercise this freedom previously. And I'm in a place where this freedom will not be criminalized. I'm in a space where this freedom is okay. And the not coming back to Zambia is also is that my kind would probably be killed, right? And I think it's an interesting conversation that we're beginning to have on the continent, right? About, like, is it really unsafe for us to travel in Africa, in our bodies, in our feminist, in our queerness? And then also another conversation about, but do we really want to take that risk? Because I felt Kabaso, that was a key thing at the front of his mind, that he was like, I just don't want to go there and face rejection from my father once again, but also potentially face rejection from my country, or be jailed or be criminalized. So I felt that, like, you packaged it in such a way that even though it didn't appear from the text on the page, it was like I could feel the anxieties that he had.
I think Kabaso potentially, okay, he represents what things were like before, and potentially what things could become tomorrow. But also, then potentially it's one of two ways, because we can't really tell if he's going to come back or if he will stay in England. It's here, yes, it's still a criminal offense. So he would be criminalized if he were to return home. But more than returning home and legal aspects, is also the family then, would he have been accepted by Grandpa Charles? Would he have not? And therefore, the heartbreaking thing about all that is then we're dealing with displacement, as we've said. We're dealing with. So then, are you saying potentially that there's a further displacement that might happen from Kabaso? You know what I mean? So then, if we had to go down Kabaso's line, there's so many possibilities and discussions and pictures we could paint. But yes, you are very right. I'm glad that you felt it that way, because he was supposed to embody what I find it very heartbreaking. That aspect, I can't wait till home can just be home for everyone. So that was supposed to come through with Kabaso.
I think also Kabaso in many ways represents, I thought of him as a model for us rethinking what freedom looks like. So in many ways, people, when you read the book, I guess when you think of freedom, people think it's just like we're free, we have no colonizers that are oppressing us. But I think that we're also being asked to expand our definitions of freedom, right? So is a freedom that doesn't involve queer people really freedom? Is a freedom that continues to oppress women a freedom? And I think that when I read Kabaso, I was looking at this and I was like, Kabaso is a call to expand our ideas of freedom, because here was Uncle Charles in many ways be conceptualizing that he needs to fight for his freedom from his colonizers, but he can't conceptualize that a Kabaso would also want freedom to just exist as he is, right, in the way that he is. This book, in many ways, I mean, we're talking about Charles, but when I think of the relationships between the daughters and their mothers, for example, I think that in many ways it's also a story of redemption, except in a particular interchange between my faith, Abisola, and Maggie, right? And I mean, you see redemption throughout the book. So almost everyone in the book is a better version of themselves by the end of it, except in this one formative relationship that has been so important for Maggie, right? I wonder, well, I'm interested as to why there was no redemption in that particular sense.
I don't think it was, would I call it intentional? I think Abisola was just Abisola. I let him do what he wanted. If there's such a thing, I let him do what he was going to do. And unfortunately, he didn't turn out to what Maggie thought he was going to be. But if you took a step back, really, you'd really ask yourself, where was he all this time? If you weren't Maggie, if you didn't have your color glasses on. So, it wasn't intentional to not redeem him. His character did what it did. He just, was Abisola. So
it's unredeemable.
I mean, I think it was an interesting commentary in the sense that, we've had people in the book just get better, right? Even Stella in all her stoicness, and even she begins to unfurl. She becomes better, right? She has a better relationship with. No, she does. I mean, the scene where Maggie says, "I just need you to be my mother," for me was very powerful, where she was like, "I don't need you to be strong in this moment. This is a vulnerability that you and I have never exchanged, and I feel comfortable enough to ask you for this in this moment after this big disappointment." And that for me was big. That was a big step in their relationship, right? And I think that it was just an interesting commentary on I guess renewed conversations we're having around whether people can redeem themselves. What does atonement look like? What does it look like to be better in the face of all of these things that have made you whatever scarred version of yourself you are?
Yeah, that's true. But not everyone can get redeemed, some
like Shashi Abisola.
And also that's the reality, right? I think that you couldn't write.
Well, Jerome, she tried,
You know what, Jerome and Abisola belong to each other. Like they belong to each other. I wanted to speak before we, run off. I wanted to speak a little bit about the craft, right? The actual writing stuff. So I think you do something really powerful. The story is the first person narrative. So we hear this from the horse's mouth in many instances, right? So we can't think about it. But you're more intentional, and I think the intentionality is because you're thinking about...
Okay.
So I wanted to say that you do something really powerful in the book, right? So you have these three women effectively tell the story, right? You've got Maggie, you've got Bupe, and you've got Grandma Margaret. But I think you also do something really important. Oftentimes when we hear stories about liberation, about people's lives, we hear them often from a male perspective, right? Or a male voice. And I think that you did something really powerful by saying these women can speak for themselves. And these women's lives are more complex and nuanced, and their stories deserve to be told. I wanted to know why it was important for you to write the book in the manner that you wrote the book.
Thank you for that question, because I think it's the one question that, you know, those three voices, of course, make the book. For Grandma Margaret, her story is told in the third person, only because it's kind of like the narrator is giving the reader some relief. And the girls' stories is told in the first person because they're the ones searching for the answers that only the reader will know about Grandma Margaret's history. So Grandmother Margaret, for me, was really important to cover because, like you said, personally, on a personal note for me, I feel like the generation of the freedom fighters generation, which is Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Charles, we really mostly heard about freedom fighters being the fathers and grandfathers. Grandmothers and mothers were mostly the wives of the freedom fighters. Oftentimes they've been rewritten or just not acknowledged enough for what they did do in the struggle. So it was important for Grandmother Margaret's story to come out, particularly the scene where she goes to the butchery with Fabiola, and all they were doing, I mean, they were, you know, everything that they did and contributed, I think, has not been covered enough in my part of Africa. I can't speak for other countries. So it was important to show that there was women behind all of this. You know, there was women before the butcheries and the chambers of commerce assigning things. There's women behind what went into the freedom struggle. And then for the girls, it was important to tell it in their voices. A bit of a struggle to make sure that the voices sounded different. I still hope they did, but that's my reader can tell me that. But it was important for them to represent the contemporary girl, the everyday, ordinary girl now who exists, but in a way that demonstrates that they are still connected to what has happened before, and that their presence today and what they're going through today will have an impact on what happens tomorrow. So coming up with Bupe and Maggie's voices was, wow, it was quite a journey. I could still hear small Bupe. Like I could still, if I read her words, she has a particular voice in my head. So spending time with them was really important because I feel they represent the possibility of what our future story should be. And what they did was carry what our past story is.
Thank you so much, Natasha. This has been absolutely amazing. I think we just want to give you your flowers before we go. As I first saw the blurb, Mubanga posted it. She posted the book and I was like, what is this book? And I Googled it and I was like, oh my gosh, we need to get this book. And it's really so exciting that, you know, the book is now available in South Africa. But more than that, I think that this book is important because we're having renewed and better conversations around generational trauma, right? Around what it means to have had an ancestry of colonization, segregation, apartheid, and all of these things that have happened to us and what that means for the ways in which we relate to each other's families, but also the fractures that lie in the ways in which we deal with each other, right? And I think that this book is so beautiful because this is what it does. It makes us have renewed conversations around what it really means to be free when someone else, when your kin is not free. Are you really free? You know, what does it mean to also think about the ways in which memory is so different for everybody, right? So how you and I can remember things completely different, which doesn't invalidate either of our experiences, but those experiences are still true. And I think that this book has done such an excellent job of bringing so much of that to the fore, and it's been absolutely absolutely exciting to have this conversation with you. I just want to encourage all of our readers to get this book from blackbirdbooks.co.za. It's available on blackbird.co.za. And we're looking forward to all of the multiple reprints that will be happening in South Africa post this conversation.
And I think just to add on to what Ahmed said, if you really want to buy the book from the Cheeky Merchant, just send us an email or DM us, tweet us and say, hey, Cheeky Merchant, this is the book that I want to get, and we'll make it happen. Again, Natasha, thank you so much for joining us on the Cheeky Natives podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure you can tell from this conversation that we absolutely enjoyed your offering.
Oh, you guys, thank you so much. It means the world, honestly, just to hear back from you guys. You know, the magic only happens when you actually read the book. It's like, before that, nothing's happening. So thank you so, so much. Thank you.
Until next time, Cheeky Natives, bye.